Hi, I'm Eileen Bild. I'm with OTEL Talk, and I'm really happy today to have on my show Lynn Reilly, and she is one of the co-contributors for the book Crappy to Happy: Sacred Stories of Transformational Joy. Hi, Lynn, how are you today?
Hi, I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good,
Thanks for having
good.
me.
You're welcome. So Lynn is an author, and she's a licensed professional counselor and a master energy therapist, which I love that. She has a passion to educate you on how to understand and support yourself to live a serendipitous life. So I want to hear a lot more about all that. So you call yourself your inner workings tour guide. So how do you explain that to people?
Well, the Inner Workings tour guide kind of came to me when I was originally writing my newsletter years back. And that's really how I saw myself because I study patterns. I'm a counselor, so I've always been working with people very intimately, listening to their stories, listening to the flow of their life. And what I often will pick up on listening to someone's story is their thought and behavior pattern. So when you're thinking a certain way, I can hear that based on the words that you use and the stories that you tell, whether you kind of are the hero in the story or something like really magical happens, that's your perception of like, oh my gosh, life is so cool. Or if you're often the victim of the story, like this always happens to me over and over and over again. That gives me insight into someone's perception of the world.
Hmm.
So listening to people's stories, I track their thought and behavior patterns. So oftentimes our thought patterns will then turn into like, I think this certain way, and then I'll behave I'll respond to that with my behavior. And so when I'm listening, I'm kind of taking in that information. And what's really fascinating is that, I've been writing for years also. So in the things that I share publicly, the ones that people connect with the most are the ones that are always connected to my personal stories of triumph, of fear, and then triumph. And so what I've noticed as people have contacted me from around the world is the one thing that we all connect with is emotion. And no matter what, we're all having that desire for love, and we're all connected to fear. So and all the gamut in between. And so what happens, I listen to stories and I can see where people's fears lies. I can see where also their hope lies and their desire lies. And so that's helped me to, listening to people, be able to see exactly where their fears lie and their desires lie. And so I'm able to guide them along the way of like, well, this fear is directing this part of your life, or this desire is directing this part of your life, and sort of guide them along their inner workings inside that they may not be able to see as easily for themselves.
Oh, that's amazing. Just imagine how many stories you can change with that skill, right? So,
Definitely.
talking about stories, you're going into that training and helping people started with your own story and your own story about that inner being. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, my own story started in childhood as everyone else's story starts.
All
And
right.
I was raised by a mentally ill mother. And because of that, because of her deeper wounds, and she had a lot of trauma that she was working with and working through, she was not able to be, she wasn't able to be the leader or the mothering role that she could have been if she didn't have all the other stuff going on. And so because of that, I had to tap into what was going on with her. So I had to assess her moods and assess her feelings and kind of gauge it in order to be able to get my needs met. So I'd have to be able to know if she was in and we all do this, whether our parents are mentally ill or not, you kind of assess people's, where they're at, their mood, to get what you need. So for me as a small child, I learned if my mother was very sad, I had to make sure I took care of her in order to get my basic needs met, in order to eat, in order to have the things that I needed. And so that developed over time into my pattern of taking care of other people. I was also a very good listener. So she would tell me all of the deep things that she had been feeling. And I was a good listener, and I would then respond to her in such a way that it really spoke to her and she felt comforted by what I said. Again, I was meeting her needs in order to meet my needs. But that developed as a skill, which then led me into the counseling field.
Right.
And I was in high school, and I learned that you could talk to people for a living and like listen to them and like get paid. I'm like, oh my gosh, I know how to do that. I can do this. So I took that on as my career. And so that really began my basic education. And then I went on to college in order to learn more formally. But really, quite frankly, with the different degrees and certifications and all that I have, absolutely my primary expertise comes from experience, my own personal experience, and just working with other people and listening to them. And books and theories are great, but real life living, that's where it's at.
Yeah, and that's very powerful to have developed that skill so young and carry that into adulthood for a career. So it's almost like second nature for you. And
using it to your advantage.
Right. Why not? I would think that part of that process for yourself and what you see in your clients is a discovery process and a discovery of something within the self. What do you want to say about that?
Well, what I normally am looking for when I'm feeling for, whatever, listening for, is the depletion of self. Because by the time that someone ends up in my office or on the phone with me, it's because there's some sort of significant disconnect going on for them. They're not living their lives fully. They're not in the flow. They're not enjoying things. It doesn't feel good to them. So I'm always listening for a disconnect to self. So usually what happens is there's some sort of pattern, oftentimes where we're giving ourselves away. That's what I see the most. We're giving our energy out excessively into some need or fear. And because we have so much energy going out, we don't have enough energy coming in. And so we become imbalanced. And so that often leads to looking like symptoms of anxiety and depression, where we're not experiencing our feelings. We're pushing it down. We're not allowing ourselves to feel what's going on for us. And that usually shows up as anxiety. Whereas depression, we are almost holding on to the feelings so much and playing them out in our head over and over and over again, which again is more energy out. And those lead to symptoms of depression. And so without fully experiencing the emotion, allowing the emotion to move through us, it creates a disconnect to self if we don't properly allow it to flow. But we're not trained for that.
No. And I would think also it causes a depletion of energy. And that's maybe where the chronic,
Exactly.
The chronic energy depletion that people feel, where they're just tired all the time. And
Right.
so, the ability to focus on oneself is not always easy. So part of what you had to learn and experience to focus on yourself, and how do you transfer that to what you teach your clients, and how they can learn to focus on themselves to bring that connection back?
Well, I had to start with me. So I was also in the camp of giving all my energy away, to the extent of, I should be giving all my energy to my kids. I should be giving all my energy to my spouse. I should be giving all my energy to upkeeping my home and my job and all the expectations, right? So I was also exhausted all the time. And it wasn't until I actually got divorced and left my job where I thought, okay, this is it. I had literally at that point began to date myself, to understand myself more. Like, I gotta get to know me. I'm always thinking about everybody else. Like, what do I like? Well, if I go out by myself, what do I want to do? I have no idea. I'm so disconnected at that point. And so I was on that path, and I was like in this really great place. But what I didn't notice, what crept up on me, were those I was worrying still excessively. What am I going to do next? What do I have to, all the shoulds that came in, like, well, my life has to look like this. And if it doesn't look like this, I'm doing it all wrong. So that even in excess is a lot of energy out. And I found myself, even though I was doing all the right things, whatever that looks like, or, you know, what we hear it might be, I was still completely miserable and exhausted and feeling depleted. And had this moment of deep despair, of feeling like I was doing it all wrong. And I actually was at that point, I heard my intuitive voice. This is actually the name of the section in my part of the book that said, I said, what am I missing? How can I possibly be doing this wrong? I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to be doing. And I heard you're missing you. You're not connected to you. You're still focusing on everyone else. You're not focusing on you. And that actually began my journey. I kind of like listened up, like, tell me more, little weird voice. What do you have to say?
What does that look like? What does that mean?
Oh my gosh. It always comes like after a good solid cry where you're like holding all to this stuff. And I'm like, literally the act of surrender. Like, I give up. What's next?
Well, I like that. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I like that term you use, dating me. I don't think I've heard anybody say it that way.
It's a really cool process, actually. And it's really fun, particularly if you've never done it before. When you do, like, literally get to know yourself, go out to eat with yourself. What do I want to order? What do I like? You know, if you're not good at making decisions, which I generally am not because I got so much in my head, it really causes you to pause, slow down, and say, what do I want? How do I feel? What is this? I'm not looking around. I'm not focusing on what other people are thinking. What do I think?
Right.
So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and I would think it also helps you to get away from feeling sorry for yourself that you're alone or feeling alone in that space of being by yourself. That it really helps you to honor who that inner person is. And I would think that once that process starts, then one of my next questions is learning to love the self and accept who we are takes practice. So how do you show up for yourself on a daily basis, and how do you teach that to your clients?
Well, it did start with that process of self-connection. So when I got divorced, I was absolutely terrified to be alone. I hadn't been alone. You know, I had lived with my family. I had I had spent plenty of time alone, but not really. I was always distracting myself being around friends, and went to college and had roommates. And then after that, I lived with my ex-husband. And so when I was getting divorced, I had never really been alone. So that was terrifying for me, because when I was alone, that means I was stuck with myself and my thoughts. And those were like wild demons often, right? Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, why are you thinking all of these things? You know, it's like disaster planning nonstop when I wasn't distracted by other things. So that process of connecting to self for me was literally slowing down, listening to the wild, crazy thoughts, and being able to start having conversations with them instead of saying, you're crazy, I need to go drink you away, or I need to go call somebody, or I need to go run away from whatever this is. So learning that process to get comfortable being still. That was the hardest part for me, was to actually learn to be comfortable to be still, which is why, you know, oftentimes when you mention meditation to someone that like freak out, particularly I always give that to my homework for my clients, and they're like, I can't meditate. My brain is insane. I'm a lunatic if I sit still. I get it. I feel it. I understand, you know, but our brain is simply an organ that's spewing out the thoughts, just like our heart is beating. It's okay. You know, that's normal. It's not actually you. So learning to be comfortable being still so you can hear your heart speak, that's able to connect to your brain so you're able to process it and understand it a little bit more and trust it, because that's another big piece too. But in terms of the daily, you know, I had to learn to slow down. I had to learn to pause. I had to learn to get comfortable being still. I had to learn to stop being afraid of my thoughts and stop connecting to them, thinking that they were me, and start to hear what I was feeling in between, as well as connect to my body. Like, what does my body say? We don't learn to listen to our bodies. We learn to, oh, my body has a symptom. I need to take a pill, or I need to go take a nap, or I need to do anything other than actually listen to what it's saying.
So asking the body what it needs, right?
Asking the body, and then responding to it.
Right.
Oh, you need to eat vegetables vegetables? No, that doesn't sound good. Pizza sounds so much more enjoyable.
That is how our brain operates, and it takes, it takes some discipline to get into that pause and quiet space and trust those little nudges. But as you have found out, and I'm sure you see in your clients time and time again, that it works and it's beautiful. And
It works.
yes, and it creates a whole nother world, a whole nother way of perceiving. And so this leads into my next part, my next question or a comment, and you can add to it. So, what I've learned is that as you start to open up to what you're talking about and you start to make that connection with the self, connection with the outer world, all of a sudden now we have those serendipitous moments. So I want to hear more about what you think about serendipity and how that plays into once a person starts to really honor that inner self and the heart and what comes to a person. So what came to you as you started to evolve out of that crazy mind into that quiet, grounded listening space? Because it is two different spaces.
Very different spaces. So learning how to slow down and connect is number one, the hardest part, because again, we have to pause, and we're not trained to pause, particularly in the culture of the United States. We're not trained to pause. We're trained to keep go, 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 go. We need to achieve. We need to do all that stuff. Right. And learning to listen to our heart actually is also frowned upon because it sounds like fluffy or, it's not logical. And that's true because intuition's voice is generally not logical. So first we have to be semi-okay with the fact that when we do sit down, logical. And that's where the brain's going to say, oh, that sounds like such a lovely idea. That's never going to work. It's never going to happen. And so there has to become a slow process of sort of like the dating yourself, right? Getting to know yourself. And just like you would get to know someone else, trust. We're learning to trust. We're learning to allow the mind to trust the heart, that we can work together, that we're not two separate things. It's all connected, and learning for them to come together. And as we do that, we're able to become more aware of the serendipity of life. So as we begin to follow our heart and listen to the guidance of our intuition, and our brain is able to process it, our brain is able to see like, oh, look, when you did this, this happened. And then I took a left, and then this person showed up. And then when I took a right because it felt right, this whole opportunity came to be. So we're able to see the serendipity. And as we're able to see the serendipity, we're actually able to trust it more. And therefore, the mind, which is taught not to trust, is able to trust the heart. The heart is connected to intuition. The heart is connected to the universe. We're able to trust the process a little bit easier.
What's coming to mind for me is co-creating. It's a co-creating with the energies that are out there that's ready and waiting for you to open your arms and say, okay, bring me what I want. And yet we have to make sure that what we want is what we want and not what we don't want.
True.
So,
very true.
Yeah, because otherwise we get that little nudge that says, well, see, I told you so, right? When things don't work out the way you wanted to. So,
well, all the time we're focused on what we don't want.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we are focused on what we don't want, that means we'll actually see it. We'll connect to what we don't want. So we think we're on the wrong path, when in reality, all it's doing is strengthening your heart's position, saying, remember, I told you we don't really like this?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that it's happening over and over again. It's actually giving us opportunity to say, yeah, it still doesn't feel good. Still doesn't, and you still have an option. You can go a different way. Today you can turn right. You went left the last 3 weeks and it didn't work out for you. Today you can go right and see what happens.
That's all choice. That's all
choice.
It's all choice. And I always find it, I'm at a point in my life now where I can laugh when something repeats itself, because I recognize, okay, I missed it the first time, it's repeating itself. And then I have to look inward and say, what am I not doing, or what am I doing that's causing this to come again? I don't want it to come again. So I have to change something. And it's not always easy to take responsibility for that. You know, we
Not
tend
even
to,
a little bit.
yeah, we tend to want to say it's somebody out there or something out there. But what you teach and what you've learned to do for yourself kind of eases that process and allows the opportunities to present itself and be able to recognize when that opportunity is there.
Right. And
So,
that is a huge practice. I can't emphasize that enough. It's not, none of this stuff is a one shot deal. Connecting with self is a practice. This is life. It just is. You know, we're always going to hit slumps, and that's when we use our practices to reconnect to self, to bring the joy back in, to even just be able to manage the day, and even the most basic self-care before we turn up. And we will always turn up. That's also the process too. Learning to trust that as a thing, that we have to sort of release that stuff too, to be able to pull back up.
well,
But
and to
even
be
just
open to
trusting the
yeah,
process is
yeah.
like, no, I'm in a slump. I'm doing it wrong. No, it doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It's just showing you where you are right now and what is asking to be released and let go.
Well, and the next step after release and let go is to be open to receiving
Yeah.
and trusting what is being received. And you know, it's sad that we're not raised to understand this connection, and we have to almost discover it and find it out when we get the 2x4, you know, hit on the head. You know, we experience something dramatic or traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, when we can understand that going from crappy to happy is an inner journey, then it's not so hard. I think people think it's harder than it really is. And
Yeah, I see that too, because that's where our inner stop signs like, oh, this road painful. I'm not going down this road, right? But if we use our experiences to show us, that's one of my trust practices. When we're afraid of something, well, look at your past as proof. You've had this fear how many countless times. How many times has it come to be? You can rely on your experiences from the past to give you hope for the current and moving forward.
exactly. Yes. And that's what's beautiful about the work that you do, because you can move someone, I like to say, in a graceful way from where they're at into a place of being able to be happy and trust that happiness, that happiness will continue. Because I think, you know, people have a lot of experiences where the happy is momentary and it doesn't stick with them. And I guess some of that is, you know, depression and the tired. You know, I think a lot of people are tired today of just
Mm-hmm.
the continuation of the challenges that they have in life. And
In particular,
say what? Say what?
this year in
Oh my
particular.
gosh, I can't tell you how many people say, I can't wait for 2021. Is 2020 over yet? It's been a challenging year. It has. And,
Absolutely.
but, you know, some people have taken the opportunity to grow, and whether it's their personal self or their business, while other people see it as doom and gloom. And so let me ask you, you know, what words of wisdom would you say to people who are still kind of in this year right now and moving forward, you know, what's a good way to handle when there's such a shift in life that's out of our control? What can we do to, or what can a person do to manage that in a constructive way that's beneficial?
Mm-hmm. The very first thing that popped in my head were the words of hope, right? The
And
longtime words of hope. This too shall pass.
yeah,
And there is a promise of that. And the beautiful part is that we're in a heavier moment. We kind of forget that this too shall pass because we remember all of the heavier moments that we had felt before. And we're like, oh my gosh, I always feel this way. I always come back to this. This is my true self. I really am a miserable human being. No, you're having a heavy moment, and this too shall pass. And that is true. Why? Because again, we can use our past as proof. Remember the last time you felt that way? How long did it last? And what happened after that? And what good came from it? Yeah, that was a really, really terrifying experience. But what did you learn from it? How did you grow? What strength came from you? What beautiful things were born from your grief or from your loss or from you facing a fear that you were absolutely certain you couldn't do? There was always something. It's learning to tune into that. We're not going to get rid of heavy moments. We're not supposed to. It's part of the human experience. We're not going to abolish them by any measure. And even triggers, those help us show us where we still have pain points and we still have some growth. That's beautiful. It's opportunity. It's more about learning to see them as opportunities, inviting them in instead of pushing them out and trying to ignore them or trying to move past them as quickly as possible, because they don't go anywhere until they're experienced. It's learning to invite the experiences to the table, feeling the emotions in their wholeness, and then taking the next step. Because as we allow the emotion to move through us, it is emotion, energy and emotion. As we allow it to move through us, it clears the path for us to hear our heart even more and to hear that intuition and to hear the next steps.
Yes, and as you're saying that, that whole part there, the word acceptance came to mind, and it had me thinking about for years and years and years since I've overcome some challenging times in my life. Uh, every time I think, okay, I got this under control, I've healed everything I need to heal, something crops up that reminds me of the pain that I had endured. And fortunately, though, it's not as strong as it has been over the periods of time from the past. And
Yes.
and I do believe that I call it polarity. You know, we can't have hot without cold, dark without light. And so in order to get to that heart space and get into that inner um, honoring that inner self, we have to experience what it's like without that to know what it is with it and to understand that. And
It's very,
yeah, and it's not an easy path to to walk, but it's so rewarding and liberating. And
it's so rewarding and liberating, but like you said, you have to allow yourself to have the experience, and that requires faith to be able to step into it and know that it is going to pass and it is going to pass through you. It's easy for me to say it like, oh, she makes it sound so easy. No, it's not easy. You know,
I wish
I was
it
the
was.
queen of pushing my pain down and not experiencing things. I mean, you know, it's easy for me to talk about it now, but for years and years, I pushed it down. I didn't let myself feel them because I wasn't, number one, I wasn't taught to. I was raised by my dad. And men, particularly in that time period, were not taught to feel their feelings. They're still not. And so I was trained to stuff it and hold on to it and put that strong face up and use humor and use distraction and numb it out and all of those things. I was exceptionally good at it, exceptionally good. And it wasn't until I started to allow myself the space came in my life and those things started to come up. I wanted to push them down, but I knew that the only way to get through it was to go through it. And it is very, very challenging because when that stuff comes up, it is like the stuff, dirty stuff in the cobwebs basement. They're like nasty. Like, why would you not clean this out? What's wrong with you? Kind of a thing. It feels disgusting when it's coming out. But once it does, that feels amazing. I mean, talk about lightness of being and just clarity. And it's like, well, I was holding on to that for so long. You know, it's literally baggage that we hold on to that we don't release. And so, you know, I look at my kids and I'm always like, guys, you've got to feel your feelings. It's so gross when you don't feel your feelings. You're just going to trust me. And they've seen me like in some tough places, like this is why we feel. It's really gross. You don't. But what happens is the more that you do it, it's just like when you clean your house, right? If you only clean it once a month, it's going to be harder to get out the grind. But if you do it on the regular, you just do the light cleaning and it comes up, like you said, it's still going to come up. I still get triggered. I still have those wounds that are just like, hey, we're still here.
I
We're still
know.
feeling us. But it moves through me so much faster now because I allow myself to have the experience. That's the big difference. The practice of not pushing it down and inviting it in, exciting the acceptance that this is life. We're actually supposed to feel.
Yes, and I would think that that ties in with the serendipitous and serendipity and the coincidences and the things that show up that support that releasing and the letting go and the moving forward, which comes me to the last question that I want to ask you. So you work with the conscious and the subconscious patterns to help people heal. So, um, when beyond what you said at the beginning, that this was a gift that developed when you were younger, when you went through your challenge and you came out of that, at what point did you realize, this is really like my purpose in life and what I really want to help people with? Because you seem really passionate, knowledgeable, skilled. So, you know, it's like, when does a person really know this is what I'm meant to be doing?
Mm.
How did you discover that?
I would say when I was a child, actually, is the first time I can remember. It was probably, so my mother took her life when I was 14, just about 15. And I can remember shortly after that, and I was in a pretty dark place, but I remember thinking to myself, making the choice, I'm going to take this and use this to my advantage. I'm going to use this experience in a way that's going to help me and going to help other people. Now, that was the thought I had. All of my behaviors after that for probably the next 10 years were like the complete opposite of that. So even though I felt it and I knew it, I was always moving in that direction, but I was so uncomfortable that I wanted to make all that discomfort go away. So it wasn't like taking like, oh, that's when I, put on my cape and I was like, this is my moment. No. That's when I was like, okay, I knew that. And but that knowledge, that inner knowledge guided me along the way, despite the fact that I was still trying to sabotage myself every step.
So do you think that uncomfortable feeling was because it was not, you didn't have an awareness of what it really was, and it was really pointing you to go inward and you weren't ready to face
Yes.
that inner self?
Yes. It was painful. I didn't realize I'm a very highly sensitive person. I am very in tune with other people's feelings and their emotions. It's extremely easy for me to connect to people's energy. And it's always been that way. When I was a child, it felt terrible because I wanted to fix it, make it okay. So when I can remember having a conversation with my aunt once when I was younger and saying, I don't know what it is, but when I'm with people, they're telling me things and I feel like it's happening to me. It's my experience. And so that was really difficult. I didn't want to live like that. I'm just like walking around feeling people's pain. Yeah, who wants that? It's told we need to be happy. You need to put on a smile. Life is fabulous. So I'm not going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so uncomfortable. Why is everyone in this room freaking out? I didn't want to live like that. So I avoided that as much as I could for as long as I could until I no longer could.
And you know what? Now that you're saying that part, it's reminding me of years and years and years of hearing people of teenage years to adults that have that same feeling because they're so
Right.
intuitive and absorbing and they don't know how to manage that or how to process it. So what I hear you saying is the key is to go into the inner work in order to be able to connect with that with another person where you don't take it on yourself.
Correct.
I got it right.
Be able to decipher the difference.
Right, right. Oh, this has been wonderful. I've loved our conversation. So,
Me too. Thank
yeah,
you.
you're welcome. So, before we close out, two things. I always ask people to share some words of wisdom, and then where people can find you, how they can find any website or social media connections.
Well, the words that popped in my head when you said that, they're not even my words. I can't remember whose they were, but I heard them in meditation once, and then I saw someone else really famous had said them. I'm like, oh, it's just universal knowledge. So I'll say it again. The only way out is through. That really has been my experience. And I think it kind of sounds daunting, but it's really quite beautiful. Because as we move through the stuff, whether it's beautiful or it's uncomfortable, that's all the experience of living. And this is it. This is our shot. We're in this lifetime. We might as well take advantage of it.
Right. And well, thank you for that. That was perfect. And how can people find you?
My website is the easiest way to find me, livingwithserendipity.com. I'm also on Facebook and on Instagram with that same handle, Living with Serendipity. And that's definitely the easiest way to find me.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, again, this has been wonderful. Thank you. It's loads of information. And as we were going through the conversation, I was thinking, this is an interview that people will listen to, and then they're going to have to listen to it again, and maybe a third time, and maybe a fourth time, because there was a lot of valuable information that came through. So much appreciated. Thank you. And we will stay in touch.
Thanks.
Thank you.